Hello, I'm Forrester, and welcome to the 5th video in my Kerbal Space Program series, No Kerbals Died, the hard mode career where I look to keep our adorable green astronauts alive throughout. Following up on the successful design from last mission, we'll be flying out to Minmus, with a view of getting some great research points from that little green gem, as well as completing a few contracts on the way. The rocket this time around is identical to the previous design, the X7 testbed. The only difference is that this time I'd like to bring the materials bay back in one piece. So with just 2 seconds left to go and lift off. The eagle-eyed amongst you will notice I have completed the upgraded tracking station for this mission. That's because with Minmus being on a slight inclination, it's a lot easier to manage to do the intercept with the tracking station upgrade. So similar to the previous mission, just throttling down the main engine a little bit, just getting those solid rocket boosters doing most of the work and keeping a little bit of extra fuel for the lowest stage. That'll be particularly useful in this flight because we will need to do a little bit of a burn in towards the inclination towards Minmus. And SRB separation there. So 6,000 meters in altitude, just moving the tilt in a little bit further towards the horizontal space. So I think the low tech of these launches is really starting to show through. There is a slight wobble at the capsule at the end compared to the rear. It's not too bad, but it is noticeable, and that of course will make it slightly more difficult to control the rocket. Here as we burn past 13,000 meters, that main engine really starting to get some acceleration behind the rocket now. So the payload for this mission is the capsule, the materials bay, a service bay which has got the various experiments in it, and 2 different heat shields. There's a heat shield beneath the materials bay as well as a heat shield underneath the capsule itself. That's just for emergency use. And here I'm just tracking Minmus through the tracking center. And this will just help me to start burning towards the necessary inclination for Minmus. Up at 30,000 meters now. So at this point, just keeping an eye on the contract I have to test the heat shield. One of the ways that I can make profit from this flight. And criteria is met, so heat shield test is completed. That's a contract done, 14,000, which is not to be sniffed at. Starting to bring the rocket further down towards the horizontal at this point. And with the apoapsis well above where it needs to be. Go for main engine cutoff and staging. So at this point here, I am just planning to burn into the inclination even before I've achieved the necessary orbital velocity. That's just to make things a little bit more efficient. We are high enough above the surface that the atmospherics aren't being too impactful on the flight at this point. I do have a couple of additional contracts here that I'll be looking to achieve from this mission. So we've tested the heat shield, also looking to bring back some science from space around Kerbin, as well as testing a parachute. And at this point, we're just doing our burn into the inclination. And that should pretty much do it. I do need to be slightly careful with the spacecraft on the X7 because there aren't any solar panels on there. The only electricity generation comes from the main engine at the rear. which means I can't afford to use up all of the electricity supply, otherwise I'll be unable to turn the spacecraft. So at this point, got the required science from space around Kerbin, so warping out to the apoapsis just so that we can do that final orbital burn. As you'll see from the bottom left, there is quite a lot of delta V in this upper stage. That was 3,000 meters a second just before achieved orbit, so there's plenty of delta V to do all sorts of maneuvers, which is why I knew it would be very, very safe to take this to Minmus and have plenty of delta V for that. So just setting up the encounter. And then making the burn across the encounter. I've sped up the footage a little bit here. And they're just optimizing to get the encounter, the flyby as low as possible, just to make it closer for when I do the deorbit burn. So it's quite a long travel time through to Minmus. The little green planet of Minmus, it is a moon of Kerbin, but it may well be a bit more like a captured comet or something like that. It's very small and very light, which is very handy actually for doing orbital maneuvers. You don't need much delta V to be manipulating the orbit. At this point here, I know that bringing the periapsis nice and low will help me just to do some low science experiments, which I hope to return through to Kerbin, get some science points from this mission. So here I'm able to do the various experiments that are aboard from space high above Minmus, and as we reach the periapsis, hope to repeat most of those experiments, except for space low above Minmus. So I'm also starting to think about planning for some landers, whether that be across to the moon or to Minmus. Getting to the stage now where, especially as I return back from this mission, I would hope to have enough science to be able to actually bring a lander down onto the surface. I was very wary of clicking that EVA report button, which is just next to the remove helmet button, which would be unfortunate. So with all of the science done, I have closed the payload bay doors on the service module and the materials bay, and there's our escape burn back into Kerbin. So I usually just travel a little way there just to make sure I'm free of the sphere of influence of Minmus, and then continue the retrograde burn. Now, I've not burned all the way to the atmosphere here. That's because I've still got 1400 meters a second of delta V left, which just means that I can continue to reduce our orbital velocity, and that will make re-entry just that bit safer. So at this point I'm going to go ahead and burn into the periapsis, cross around till we're just about in the atmosphere, and at this point we'll go for the second engine cutoff and the staging. So where I went wrong in the last mission was being slightly too aggressive with the time warp on re-entry. This time around, just going into single speed so physics doesn't work against us, and just asking the command pod to try and keep things facing a retrograde where possible. That means that the heat shield underneath the materials bay, providing the bulk of all of the re-entry heating going through that, which means that the materials bay should survive it. Slowing down nicely, we pass through 30,000 meters, 25,000 meters, And as we start to hit the thicker lower atmosphere, the speed will really just tail away. So I'm going to deploy parachutes slightly earlier than usual, just to get the drogue chute test contract achieved. And wiggle the command pod just to try and achieve it. There we go. That's contract achieved, parachutes deployed, and looking like we should have a gentle splashdown near to the Space Center. So, as the 5th episode finishes, please continue to like, subscribe to the channel if you aren't already, and get involved by giving me encouragement or otherwise in the comments. I happily leave you with the ubiquitous closing remark for every mission in this series: no Kerbals were harmed in the making of this video.